Hello there. Today I am going to show you how to make a hat with a brim and a pom-pom. I'm going to be using the purple Nifty Knitter hat loom. This is for an adult size hat. There are many other round looms if you want to do a smaller hat, but today we're going to do an adult hat. We are going to be using Red Heart Super Saver yarn. This is a color called Blacklight. It's works up really neat. It's really nice and bright. So what I do is pair it with black yarn. This is going to be a thick hat, so it'll be nice and warm. So we're going to use 2 strands at a time. We're not going to use this quite yet because we're going to do the brim first. And for the brim, I'm just going to use black. I'm also going to make a pom-pom for this hat. And I'm going to use a Clover pom-pom maker. You can use whatever way that you like to make a pom-pom, but I will show you how to do one with this. And then also, it's a good idea to have a counter because we do need to count our rows on this hat. There's a couple of different kinds of counters out there. There's this one, which is one that I use if I'm not going to be setting my knitting aside for any length of time, like if I'm going to be doing something that I'm going to do it all in one go, or I know I'm not going to need to move it around, I'll use this one. Otherwise, I will use this one, and the reason this one is so helpful is because it actually has a lock on it, and you can lock it so you don't have to worry about accidentally moving the numbers. And then you can see I have a piece of yarn tied on it because sometimes I'll wear it around my neck. My preferred hook to use is this one that's made by Knitting Board. I like it because it has a nice grip. Apologize for the little interruption in the video there. My battery died. So we'll start this again. Anyway, here's my loom hook. So the first thing we're going to do is start with our black yarn. And I have 2 skeins so that I don't have to go around this thing more times since I want to use 2 strands. So the first thing we're going to do is tie a slip knot, and there's a lot of different ways to do that. My preferred way, I will show you, I'm just trying to get some yarn pulled off here, is to take the yarn around my finger and wrap it 2 times like that. And then I hold it with my thumb and finger down here, and then I loop this one over this one. 1, 2, and then I pull up. And then see there's a slip knot right there. You take that knot and you put it on this peg right here. This is called your anchor peg. And then just pull the knot tight. And the reason we use a slip knot is so that later we can pull that out easily. And this is just a little tail of yarn that'll hang here until later on when we're doing the brim, and I'll show you how to get rid of that. So the next thing you do is, this is considered peg 1 right here. It's right over the anchor peg. So then we're going to start looping the yarn around these pegs, starting with that one. So there's 1, 2, 3, and then you just keep wrapping it around, and then I'll pull it down as I'm going because we're going to come back around and do another loop. And you just keep going all the way around. Now if you only had 1 skein of yarn, you could go around this whole thing a total of 4 times to end up with 2 double strands. And I've done that when I use a little bit more of an expensive yarn, or maybe I'm getting a little low on a color, but I know that there's enough there to make a brim of a hat. And this yarn is not wanting to come out. Normally what I do with my yarn is I use a yarn winder and I'll make it into yarn cakes, and they're much easier to pull from. And there's several videos out there that show how a yarn winder works. Okay, see now I've made it all the way around one time. Now I'm going to go around a second time. So we just start again on that same peg, and you can see now why I was pushing that yarn down. One of these skeins of yarn is wanting to be tricky on me. And you just keep going around. And then if your yarn or something's bothering you like mine is, you just kind of hold it there. Because sometimes you will accidentally have it unravel, and that's not a big deal. You just go back again and wrap it around. This particular round loom has 48 pegs on it. This is my favorite loom to make a hat on. It's perfect size for an adult man or woman. There's a yellow loom that some people say is too big for like an adult. I haven't actually used it, so I can't speak on that for sure. Whoops. Okay, and see, now we're back. So you loop that, and then I always just take and kind of put it down a little bit, and then take your thumb and just hold it. I've seen people do this different ways. Some people will take their hook and they'll start over here and go around, but then you always have to hold on to that yarn, and that's very awkward. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start from this side and go around. So you take your hook and you put it under that bottom one and you put it over the peg. That's called knitting over. And see how now there's just the one? And then I do about 3 of them. And then you can let go of that yarn. You don't have to hold it anymore because it's held by that peg. So it's not awkward where you're trying to keep a hold of it as you're going around. So just go all the way around, just like that, and keep knitting over. Now these Nifty Knitter looms, and probably most looms, come with the hook like this, but I like this one because it's more, I like the more beefiness of the handle. It's easier to work with. And this one, it was only $2.99. You can get it like at Joann's. I don't know if they carry it at places like Walmart or not. At least at my Walmart I haven't seen it, but I always see it at Joann's. That noise that you might hear in the background is my dishwasher. I didn't even think about it. Went ahead and started running the dishwasher, and I don't know. Oh well, at least I'll have some clean dishes by the time I'm done with this hat. We're almost back to where we started. Okay, and there we go. And this is 1 row. So then you take your handy little counter and you click 1. We've got 1 row. So push all that down. And you're ready to start on your next row. Now this time you're only going to have to go around the loom once because you have a row already on here. First time we had to go around twice because we didn't have any rows on there yet. And you do the same thing. You start with peg 1 and you wrap around just like that. Back to front, back to front, back to front, and just keep on going. Oops. Don't expect yourself to be perfect. Nobody is. Okay. My problem is this skein of yarn wants to be pesky. It's like the yarn's in there too tight or something. Should have used my yarn winder and wound it into cakes, and I wouldn't be having to deal with it. I hope you can see this okay. And what I'm going to do is go around this just a few times so you can get the hang of it, and then I will pause the video so that we can go at our own pace with the rest of our rows, and I'll come back. So see, here we are again at the end. So hold that yarn, and go ahead and loop over 3 of them. So 1, 2, 3, and then you can let go of that yarn. Don't have to worry about him. He's not going to come undone. And then just keep on looping over, knitting over. And this stitch we're using is called an E-wrap. There are some other stitches that you can use. This one is so far the one I'm the most comfortable with on a brim. I like it. It's fast. I feel like it's easy. It comes out looking really nice. I like the Nifty Knitter looms because they have this little groove in them, and it makes it nice and easy to get your hook down under the yarn. Okay, and there we're done with the last one. So we've got 2 rows now, so take your nifty little counter, click another row. If you don't want to invest the money in a counter, you can always use a pen and paper. You don't have to spend any money on it. So push all our rows down. And then one thing that I do that I'll share with you too, because I think it's a good idea, is every so often between my rows I will stop and flex my fingers. You know, because how they talk about repetitive motion injury, and I'm hoping that I won't end up with carpal tunnel someday. Seems like it runs in my family. A lot of the women in my family have had it, but they've also been very crafty. Got a lot of crafters in my family who have crocheted or knitted or plastic canvased, all that stuff. So, you know, the repetitive motion. So I'm hoping I won't get it, because I also, where I work, I do a lot of typing. So now we've got 2 rows, and let's start a 3rd. And again, we start on that first peg, and then you're just going to loop it around, back to front, back to front. And I also should mention, you're not needing to put this on here super tight. You kind of just let it flow through your fingers. You're not using any force to put the yarn on or anything like that. If you do it too tight, it's going to be way too hard to get that bottom loop over that top loop. And you could possibly even break a peg. And that wouldn't be any fun right in the middle of a project. I have bought extra pegs for my Nifty Knitter looms. I have these round ones, and the pegs are a little bit bigger. And then I also have, they're called long looms, or they're rectangular shaped looms. And their pegs are a little smaller, so, but I've got replacement pegs for both, just in case. See, there we go. Now we're back to the end again, so hold that yarn and then start knitting over. Grab those 2 strands on the bottom, put them over the 2 strands on the top. That's not so bad, is it? And just keep going around. Now what I'm going to do is, for the brim on my hat, I'm going to do 22 rows. And what we're going to end up doing later is we're going to pull the bottom row up, and you'll see what I'm talking about. But basically we're going to pull it up from the inside and wrap it over, and it's going to form a brim. And I'm going to show you how to do that. So basically my brim's not going to be, you know, really big 22 row brim, because it's going to be doubled. And so really it's just 11 rows. And I've done some experimenting, and I just like doing 22 rows to make a brim. You can go with whatever you think you would like. I like the brim to be able to be nice and warm. I also have experimented on my husband and done a couple of hats for him, and that's been his favorite so far, is the 22. So then we're back at the end again. So we're going to do our row counter. We've done 3 now. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and pause the video, and then you go and do as many more rows as you want. Let's see, I don't know if you can see that, how it's coming out. But this will start just kind of rolling down here. Don't worry if it curls as it's coming down. That's not a big deal. We're going to take this and we're going to be folding it up in a little while. I'm going to do 22 rows total, so 22 minus the 3 that I've already done, and then I will meet you back here. Okay, so now we've knitted 22 rows, and see what I mean by curling, how it curled, and then it's kind of pulling up where the tail is, and all that's okay. It looks really big right now, but it won't once we get it folded. So the first thing that you want to do is release that yarn from that anchor peg, and then just kind of pull it down. And the slip knot came out by itself when I was pulling that down. So now you've got all this yarn here. So what we're going to do to make the brim of our hat is fold this over. So if you put your loom down and you kind of pull this up, you can see where your first stitch was. See how as you're looking you can see where here's your tail, all the stitches. And what we're going to do is we're going to take that first stitch and we're going to fold it over the pegs. See how I did that? Just folded it right over the peg. And sometimes it can be a little tricky to find what the first stitch was, but you'll figure it out. And if you accidentally do it wrong, which I've done before, and pulled the wrong stitch, you'll see, you'll be able to tell. So what we're going to do with our little buddy, the tail here, is we're just going to tuck him in. We're going to fold him up inside the brim. So he'll be nice and secure and cozy in there. And we're just going to continue to take that first stitch. And see how there's that fold? And then as it uncurls, it kind of shows you where it is itself. And then just be mindful of that tail. You might have to keep tucking that part back in. And so let me get the first few. See, and I'll be done with him. He'll be out of my way. And it doesn't matter if you go this way or that way. Wherever it was that you found those stitches, you can start anywhere. And see, then they kind of just, once you have them on there, you can kind of see the next ones. They kind of, you just uncurl, and those ones popped off. So just stick them back on there. And then as you're uncurling that curl, they kind of reveal themselves to you. And you just keep going on along. But like if you accidentally miss a stitch or something, when you get to the end, you'll be like, okay, what happened? I have an extra peg or an extra stitch. And I've done that before. Then you just pop them all off and you start over. And you just keep on going and see how that's forming a brim. And see, I almost did it there. I almost skipped one. probably if I would have picked a brighter yarn, that might have been better for a tutorial. But I had this hat that I'm making for someone, so I thought, well, since I'm already going to be making a hat, why don't I go ahead and do a tutorial at the same time? So we're coming on along here. And if it's hard for you to grab the stitches with your fingers, you can always use your your hook too. I just find it easier to use my fingers because then I can kind of feel the stitches. And then when you're getting to the end, they get a little tighter in there. So they're just a little, they kind of hide from you. And there we go. Make sure I got them all. See, and I just did what I just said that I told you before. I think I might have missed a, well, maybe not. Actually, never mind me, I didn't. Okay, so now we have this all folded up, and that's what's going to be the brim or the cuff of our hat. And so now what we're going to do is knit over again. So we're going to start knitting that bottom one over, whoops, the top one. See how that pulled? That's because this is my working yarn. So once I pull him over, I'm just going to tighten that yarn back up. And then just keep on going. This is a little bit tighter than before in this first, and when you're doing the brim it will be. So you might have to give it a little bit more work than you did before to get that bottom loop over the top loop. And that's normal. Just keep going around. So that was tight. There's a lot of going around when you have a 48 peg loom. Whoops. And see right there is that tail where he's in there. This is going to get him nice and secured in there. You don't even see him anymore, because he's inside the brim. Okay, then you just push it down. And now we're ready to start making the body of the hat. But you see we still have our yarn here. Now if I was just going to make the whole rest of the hat black, it wouldn't be a big deal. I'd just leave my yarn and I'd be fine. But I don't. I want to use some black, but then I want to switch out my colors. And I'm going to start using that black light colored yarn. So I'm going to cut one of these. And the one I'm getting rid of is the one that's been a pesky guy throughout this thing. So now I still have some yarn that I'm going to work with, but I'm going to bring in another yarn too. And there's different ways that people do to change yarn colors or whatever. I'll show you the one I use. To me, I like it, and it's the one I'm going to keep using. And if you want to do something different, there's a whole bunch of videos out there. So again, I'm going to do the slip knot. So I'm going to wrap this yarn around my finger twice. See how bright that is? And then loop it over once, loop it over twice, and then pull up, and there's my slip knot. And I'm going to put that on my first peg. and just kind of pull it tight. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to tie it to my old yarn that I'm not going to use anymore. And I know some people don't like to make knots or whatever, but to me it's on the inside of the hat, so who cares? Who's going to see it? I mean, unless you're going to wear your hat inside out, big deal. And so just get it nice and secure. And then I'm going to cut that off. We're done. Now I've got 2 strands of yarn again. And then, since I already had a piece of yarn that I was working already, the black one, I'm going to go ahead and loop him around this peg, the number 1 peg. So now I have 2 and 2. So there's peg 1, and then I'm going to start wrapping again, just like you did for the brim. And the reason I chose to pair this black light yarn with plain black is because it is so bright. If you have somebody that would like, and it's got its own black in it too, and that's why I picked black to be a color to pair it with, is because I'm making this hat for an adult. I think a kid would love all the way bright, but it makes it a little bit more toned down for an adult. But this person likes bright colors, and so there we are. So we pull the yarn down like we did before and hold it with our thumb, and loop over the first, or knit over the first 3 pegs. And that one's kind of hard. And then here we go. We can let go. And then you just keep going all the way around. It's kind of tight this time because now we're dealing with that other piece from the brim. The next row will be easier because we're going to be dealing with just the body of our hat again. So just keep going around. And you know, at the very beginning when I showed you how to put the yarn on for the first row, that's called casting on. So if you're trying to follow like a pattern book or something, or you hear somebody say casting on, that's what that is. Or if you're already familiar with knitting or looming, you'll already know what that means. Okay, now we're back to the beginning. So that's actually row 1 of the body of your hat. So push all of your knitting down, just like you've done all along. And then if you haven't already, reset your counter. Oops. And there's row 1. Now for this one, I am going to do probably between 18 and 20 rows. It just depends. And it's kind of funny because what I do is I'll like sit here and hold the loom up against my head, and sometimes I'll even put the hat on with the loom on to see where, if I can feel, because once we're going, you'll see the body of the hat come out, and you'll be able to see if it would fit your head, to see how tall you want it. One time I made one that was so tall it went down to the person's eyeballs, and I don't want it that big. So it just depends on your yarn. Normally with Red Heart, it's not as stretchy, or the Red Heart Super Saver, so you're usually pretty safe with between 18 and 20 rows. If you're using something that's more stretchy or thicker, then you'll use less because it has more give to it. So I'm going to start with, I know I'm going to do at least 18 rows. So we'll start row 2. That yarn is so bright, it's really neat. I grew up in the 80s, and it reminds me of the 80s with all the fluorescent and bright. It's kind of neat to see that stuff coming back. Not that, you know, I would wear it at my age now, but it's fun to... I'd wear it in a hat or a scarf. Or hell, I'd probably wear it with anything. That's just me. And loop it and hold it with your thumb. And then knit over again. And see how it's getting easier again to knit this over. And I do the brim in black, and I do the pom-pom in black, so it just kind of has a nice contrast. And believe it or not, it even makes the black light, the fluorescent colors stand out a little bit better when you have that contrast. So we're back to the beginning again. Another row, push your knitting down. Do a little bit of stretching of those fingers. This was also something that I learned because a few years ago I broke my wrist, and so I had a cast on for a really long time. And so we're going to do another row now. And so once that cast came off, I had no strength at all in that hand. I couldn't, it was my right hand too, I couldn't even write. It was really weird. And so the doctor had given me some little exercises to use to strengthen all the tendons and everything back up again. And so I'll use some of those little exercises. Just because I really don't want to end up with that, with any kind of carpal tunnel. Okay, hold on again. And knit over. I'm going to do like I did with the brim, where I'll pause the video and let you continue on for as many rows as you want to do for the size of hat that you're making. And since I'm doing an adult hat for a woman, it's probably going to be between 18 and 20 rows. It'll just depend. But like I said, I'll hold it up to my own head. And so far, so good. You know, if it fits me, it's fit all the women that I've given a hat to. My husband, for him, I have to go, and then some hats that I made for some friends of his, I do a 22-22. 22 for the brim, 22 for the body of the hat. But my husband likes the hats to fit down below his ears. He wants them to go all the way below. So there's another finished row. See, from the inside you can see how pretty that's going to be. And as it starts to come down, you'll be able to start seeing what your hat's going to look like. Of course, you'll see whatever colors you're using. So I'll go ahead and I will pause for now. I've done my 20 rows. My hat is ready to come off the loom. Now there are two ways that you can take a hat off of the loom. One of the ways has you putting yarn through every single peg. And there's another way that's called where you do a decrease, and where you're pretty much putting the yarn through every other peg. And that makes the hat a little bit less bunchy on the top, and it's the way that I prefer, so that's the way I'm going to show you. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and cut this yarn that we were using. We don't need it anymore for right now, so I'll just get that out of my way. And so the first thing you'll do to kind of get this to what's called decrease is, remember I said this peg right here is peg 1? We're going to take the yarn off of peg 1 and put it on peg 2. And I use my hook to do that because it can be a little tricky. So I'm going to take it off of peg 1, and you can untwist it, and I'm going to put it on to peg 2. See, it's on peg 2. Then I'm going to take peg 3 and take the yarn off of peg 3 and put it on peg 4. And like I said, it can be a little tricky, so don't let that get you down. And you could also not do this part at all. So see, now I've got peg 1, no yarn, 2, no yarn, 2. So then we're going to go here and take this off and put it on the peg next to it. And it is tricky, but it's worth it. So see, here we go. You know, no yarn, 2 yarns, no yarn, 2 yarns, no yarn, 2 yarns, and we just are going to keep going around. And basically you'll end up with every other peg not having any yarn on it. And every once in a while I'll drop the stitch off this thing too, and if you do that you can pick it up. This one's being really tricky. Okay. Just going to keep on going, getting this stuff to loop over here as good as I can. And probably if I had a yarn that was a little stretchier, it might be easier. I don't know, it might be harder too. Keep on going, taking it off of one peg, putting it on the next. And again, you don't have to do this. You can do the bind off, which is the next part I'll show you after we're done decreasing. You can do it without decreasing. I've done hats both ways. This one just makes it a little less bunchy on the top. I'm finding using a combination of my fingers and the hook is helping me out. And I'm almost to the end, I think. And if your working yarn gets in your way, you can just toss it in the middle, like this one came through. Okay, it's our last peg. And then see, now every other peg is empty. So what you're going to do now is go ahead and knit over one last time. So we will secure all those that we just did. So we're going to knit over. Now if you wouldn't have done the decrease, you wouldn't have to knit over one extra time either. But you can always try it both ways and see which one you like the best. It's much easier to see when you've got more than just black. Here's our last peg. Okay, so then go ahead and push it all down. Okay, the next step's actually going to be pulling this thing off of here. But we need a way to be able to cinch our hat together. So we're going to use a darning needle. This is my favorite brand because it's called Chibi or Chibi. I don't really know how to pronounce it. By Clover. And I like it because it comes with a handy little case. And I like these needles that are curved. This is a darning needle. The curve makes it easy to get on the peg. So then you're just going to take some yarn, and you only need one strand this time, and thread your needle. And you're going to need enough to be able to cinch this hat off. So what I always do is I just wrap the yarn around my loom about 1.5 times, because then I know I'm going to have enough yarn. And then you can go ahead and cut the yarn. So what we're going to do is take the yarn and go through. See how I went through the bottom of that peg? You're going to thread through the bottom. And then leave a tail out because you're going to be pulling on this later. And then just kind of hold it with your thumb until you get through a couple more pegs. And then go to the next peg. You're going to do all the pegs with yarn on them. If you wouldn't have done that decrease, you would have just been doing this step right here through all 48 pegs that you had before we did the decrease. And so we're going to go, whoops. And he looped over the peg by himself, which isn't a big deal. We'll just pull him off, and there we go. Just kind of watch your yarn because it tries to do tricky little things with you like that. Tell you something new I learned when I first started looming. I kept hearing people say they had to frog a project, frog like a frog, and I couldn't figure out what in the world that meant. So I asked on one of the Facebook groups that I'm on, and somebody told me it means that you had to rip your project apart, rip it, like a frog goes ribbit, ribbit. So they call that frogging a project because you had to rip it apart. I thought that was really cute. Because that happens sometimes. I had that happen with a hat not too long ago that I messed up on part of actually all the way at the very end, this part I'm showing you here. Was using all the same color yarn, so I got a little mixed up at the end and I ended up pulling the wrong piece of yarn. And it ruined the whole hat. It was very depressing to go through all that work to have to just totally frog the whole project. Rip it up. Rip it all out. Oops. Okay, and this is the last peg that we hadn't threaded. And then go ahead and thread the first one you did again. See, now you've made it through every single one of them. You can take your yarn off your needle and you can go ahead and cut that extra off. See, I didn't end up with too much extra. Now we're going to take the hat off the loom. Hold on to these two pieces. That's what I messed up with one time. I mixed up my working yarn, and grabbed it at the end accidentally instead of this. So keep a hold of that. then take your hook and then just start taking these off. You're just going to let it fall down into the middle. See, I'm not letting go over here. And it doesn't matter if the yarn gets loose or anything as you're taking it off of the loom, because we're going to tighten all that at the end. Just pulling the whole hat off the loom. Okay. There's my two that I didn't let go of. I'm going to pull, see? All done with the loom now. And here's what I hadn't let go of. And the hat's off. So now what we're going to do is we're going to start pulling. And see how that's coming together? You just keep pulling. And that cinches the hat. And you pull it nice and tight. And then we're going to tie a knot with these. Nice tight knot. Got to be careful with some yarns because they'll try to break. So don't pull, with every single ounce of strength you have. And actually I'm going to make this a little bit shorter so I have a little bit more leverage. And I probably tie more knots than I need to, but it can't be too safe, right? Then, this was the yarn you were working with all along, and I'm just going to tie these together and some knots. And then I just noticed something I messed up. This hat was supposed to do that from the inside. So, luckily we're putting a pom-pom on our hat, but next time, make sure when you do that step that I just showed you with tying the knots, your hat's inside out. It won't matter on this one because we're putting a pom-pom. But see, now my knot's going to be on the outside. So if I wasn't going to use a pom-pom, you'd see it. Which really somebody'd have to be at the top of your head to see it. But so there's our hat. All done. So next I'll show you how to make the pom-pom. This is how to make a pom-pom. I have a extra large Clover pom-pom maker. The very first time I tried to use one of these, it confused the heck out of me. So I found a video on YouTube to use it. So the first thing you do is you unfold it. And see, it looks like this. And then make sure that the unfolded part has this groove in it. First time I tried to do this, I didn't have the groove in it, and it didn't do a pom-pom right. So next we're going to take whatever yarn that we're going to use for our pom-pom and start wrapping it around this pom-pom maker. And it can be a little bit tricky, trying to hold on to it and everything. See how it tries to come apart and everything. So you kind of have to work with it. And there might be easier pom-pom makers out there, but this is the one that I've grown accustomed to using. So you're going to start wrapping your yarn around it. This little fella, I need to get him covered. And it doesn't have to be like perfect, because you're going to end up cutting it and shaking the pom-pom and everything anyway, so just going to wrap it around. And the more times you wrap it, or overlap it, I guess I should say, the poofier the puff ball is going to be. Like if you use a really thin yarn, you'd probably want to maybe double and triple wrap it. Unless you want a real thin pom-pom. You're just going to wrap it all the way till the end. And then I'm going to kind of go back. And then make sure that you finish over here, because you're going to fold this in and then start wrapping this other one. So you want to make sure the yarn is close to this little guy over here on this side. And then you're just going to do the same thing over here with wrapping. These make me think of a half moon, or half a donut, I guess. Whoops. Okay, then when you're done wrapping, you fold this other side in as well. And then you can go ahead and cut that yarn. And we'll end up pulling that out after we're done. So then you hold this together, and you need some nice, sharp, thin scissors, and you just start cutting in the middle there. And that's what's going to make your pom-pom. And you just keep going around. And then see, we've cut the whole thing. Don't let this come apart, but you cut another piece of yarn. And then you're going to take the yarn, and how there's that groove there, put it in that groove, and come out around the other side. And then tie a really tight knot. Because that's what's going to tie your pom-pom together in the middle. Let's see, you tie it really tight. And then I kind of just go back and forth with tying it. And I don't know how many times you're really supposed to do it. I'm going to pull this guy, he's in my way. See how he just comes out? You know, if there's like a magic number for how many times you're supposed to do this. And then I'm going to tie this time I'm going to tie knots. Just so I can make sure that it's nice and tight. Because after all that work, you don't want your pom-pom to fall apart. Then there's actually a pom-pom in there. So now you can pull this apart. You can start unhooking these. And then the whole thing itself comes undone. So these two white parts, you can pull them apart. And take your pom-pom out and see. There's two pieces. And you just put it back together. Shut it up. And you're done with him till the next time. And here's your pom-pom. He doesn't look so great right now. He's kind of flat. So you poof him up. And he's starting to look a lot better. And then you just trim him up. You know, if he's got some parts where he doesn't look that great, you just trim it. And get it where you want it and what you like. can attach it to your hat. I'm going to make those just a little shorter. Scissors are a wonderful thing. Okay, so here's our hat. Here's a pom-pom. I have a crochet hook. You can just use whatever size you're most comfortable with. This one is in 5mm. And then go inside the hat and then just come up. See how I brought that crochet hook? And then there's the pieces of yarn hanging off the pom-pom. Just grab one of those, hook it around your crochet hook, and pull that thread into the inside of the hat. There we go. And then I'm going to do the same thing on the other side of the hat. Poke my crochet hook, take that other piece of yarn, and pull it through to the inside of the hat. And then before you tie it off, make sure that your pom-pom is where you want it. And I like where that one is. So I'm going to turn my hat inside out. And then tie some knots. You know how not happy I am. I'm probably going to tie at least 4. Okay, for good measure, I'm going to tie 5. And then just cut your yarn off. Turn your hat around. Voila! You have a hat with a pom-pom. And it is just as cute as can be. And then if you want, you can add some embellishments along the brim. That's part of why I like to have the solid brim. I found these buttons that are flower shaped that are the same colors as what's in this blacklight yarn. So I'll probably add some of these little buttons. And normally when I add buttons or some kind of an embellishment like this to a hat, I use embroidery thread, because usually the hole for the buttons, although these look like they may be big enough for yarn, but if they're not big enough for yarn, you can use embroidery or craft thread. It's nice and thick, and it'll hold really well. So anyway, there is a nice finished hat with a brim and a pom-pom. I hope that this video was helpful, and I hope you have a nice day, and happy looming. Thank you.